Hey, amazing viewers, I love connecting with you all around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will leave you inspired and ready to take control of your own life. In today's story, you'll hear about an incredible twist that no one saw coming. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. The Thanksgiving table. Thanksgiving had always been Catherine Martin's favorite holiday. The thought of a warm, cozy home filled with family, laughter, and the comforting aroma of roasted turkey always brought a sense of joy. It was supposed to be a time for gratitude, love, and togetherness. But this year, everything felt different. Catherine sat at her desk in the pediatric ward, her gaze drifting out of the office window, watching as the first signs of Cleveland's cold winter painted the streets with a thick layer of snow. The world outside seemed peaceful, calm, but within her heart, a storm raged that wouldn't subside. She was a seasoned pediatrician, with over a decade of experience, used to the ebb and flow of hospital life. But for the past few months, her daily routine had felt like a constant battle to keep her emotions in check. It had started 5 months ago when she lost her baby, the baby she and her husband, James, had waited for so long. They had dreamed of this moment, the joy of being parents, the hope of expanding their family. But everything was taken from them in one night. Catherine reached for the picture frame on her desk, her fingers brushing against the glass of a photo from their wedding day. It was a moment frozen in time, full of promise, full of dreams. But then, the nightmare came. Sudden abdominal pain. The long, agonizing night at the hospital. The doctor's apologetic expression. The words that crushed her soul. "I'm sorry, Catherine. You've lost your baby." She unconsciously placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the emptiness that had consumed her since. A deep, crushing loss. The pain was still raw, fresh in her memory, and she couldn't help but wonder how life would have been if they hadn't lost their child. She could have been 7 months pregnant by now, celebrating Thanksgiving surrounded by family, and feeling the baby kick within her. The sound of a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A nurse entered, announcing that the first patient was ready. Catherine took a deep breath and shook herself out of her reverie, forcing her professional smile to return. The day would go on, and work would continue. There would be time for grief later. She couldn't afford to wallow in sorrow. Not now. Not when so many people relied on her. The office phone rang, jolting Catherine back to reality. She picked up the receiver, bracing herself for another call. It was her mother, Elizabeth. Catherine could already feel the familiar tension rise in her chest. Her mother's voice always had that effect on her. A strange mixture of love, control, and subtle disapproval. "Kathy, it's Mom," Elizabeth's voice chirped. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, steeling herself for whatever was coming next. Her mother was never one to leave her alone, especially when family events were looming. "Good morning, Mom. What's up?" "I wanted to confirm our Thanksgiving plans. I've invited James's mother too, since it's the first time I'll be meeting her," Elizabeth said with an air of perfection. "As always, I want everything to be perfect." Catherine frowned, glancing at the clock on her desk. James's mother. She hadn't expected her mom to invite her mother-in-law to their family dinner. Elizabeth rarely embraced new people into their social circle, especially someone as humble as Eleanor Martin, James's mother, but Catherine could understand why. Eleanor had been a constant source of support for her since the miscarriage, a voice of reason when everything seemed lost. "You invited James's mom?" Catherine asked, her surprise barely concealed. "Yes, of course. She's part of our family now, especially after the event," Elizabeth replied, her tone almost dismissive, as if the miscarriage had been a mere inconvenience, a blemish on the family name. Catherine's heart sank at her mother's words. She never would have imagined her mother would reduce the loss of a child to something so trivial, something to be swept under the rug. Elizabeth continued, oblivious to her daughter's growing discomfort. "And Victoria and Tom are coming too. They're bringing little Timothy. You'll be seeing them soon. Victoria, Catherine's older sister. The perfect daughter. The perfect mother. A stay-at-home mom with a 3-year-old son, always striving to meet Elizabeth's high standards. Catherine had always been compared to Victoria, but now, in the aftermath of her miscarriage, the comparisons felt even more painful. "And Dad?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's the same as always, locked in his study, reading his books." "You know how he is," Elizabeth responded with a trace of irritation. It was clear that her father's quiet demeanor was not what her mother wanted in a social setting. Catherine's mind wandered back to Thanksgiving. It should have been a time to feel the joy of motherhood, to share the excitement of expecting their child with family. But instead, it felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. She texted James, letting him know that her mother had invited his mom to Thanksgiving. The reply came almost instantly. "Of course we're a team. Let's get through this together." Her heart lifted slightly at his words. He had always been her rock, her steady support in the storm. Together, they would get through this, no matter how tense or difficult it might be. But still, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. The next day, as she prepared for Thanksgiving dinner at her mother's house, Catherine couldn't help but wonder how it would play out. The tension was already high. Would her mother and sister truly understand her pain? Would they offer the comfort she so desperately needed, or would they continue to invalidate her feelings? James stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, as they walked into her mother's home. The door opened with a creak, and Catherine stepped inside, bracing herself for whatever was to come. And that's when it all began to unravel. The Thanksgiving tension. The door to the Anderson family home creaked open. The familiar smell of rich, roasted turkey and fresh pumpkin pie wafting into Catherine's senses. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat a reminder of what lay ahead. A Thanksgiving that would be nothing like the warm gathering she had always imagined. She held her breath, as if hoping that, just for a moment, things would feel normal again. But the weight of the past few months loomed over her like a dark cloud. James squeezed her hand gently, offering her silent support, but Catherine couldn't shake the anxiety that gripped her. Thanksgiving had always been a time for connection, for family. But this year, it felt like the holiday was no longer a symbol of love, but rather a reminder of the sharp sting of loss. A time for her to face the harsh reality that her family's definition of love was as fragile as glass. As they walked through the hallway into the living room, Catherine's mother, Elizabeth, was already standing at the door, her impeccable makeup and tailored outfit giving her the appearance of a woman who had it all. A perfect hostess, as always. "Kathy, James, you're late," Elizabeth said, her voice cool, even though her smile was painted on with practiced precision. Catherine couldn't help but feel the biting coldness beneath her mother's seemingly cheerful exterior. Victoria, her older sister, was perched on the arm of a chair, Timothy in her lap. She wore a pristine, cashmere sweater and styled hair, as though she'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Timothy, her 3-year-old son, beamed at Catherine as though everything in their world was as it should be. But Catherine couldn't help but feel a pang in her chest. It was all too perfect, too easy. Eleanor, James's mother, was already there, standing up with a welcoming smile as she caught sight of Catherine and James entering. "You finally made it," Eleanor said warmly, walking toward them with open arms. Catherine could feel the weight in her chest lighten just a little. Eleanor had always been the one person who made her feel seen. But even now, with her mother's cold gaze following her every move, Eleanor's kindness didn't erase the anxiety in Catherine's heart. "Have you gained weight recently?" Elizabeth's voice broke through the noise in the room, sharp and cutting. Catherine froze, her hand instinctively clutching the edge of the doorframe for support. Her mother's words hung in the air, like ice-cold daggers piercing her skin. Victoria let out a nervous laugh, brushing it off as if it were nothing, but Catherine could feel the weight of the comment settle like a stone in her stomach. "Mom, "Don't say such things," Victoria said, though her tone held a slight edge of amusement, as if it were just another jab at her sister. Catherine forced a smile, her hands trembling as she tried to remain composed. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice sounding too small, too vulnerable, as she fought to keep the tears that threatened to spill at bay. The worst part, her mother didn't even seem to notice how hurtful her words were. It was as if her focus was solely on appearances, on maintaining the illusion of the perfect family. Dinner was ready, and everyone moved toward the dining room, Catherine following behind, her legs feeling heavier with each step. The long, polished table stretched out before them, laden with plates of golden turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and green beans, everything perfectly arranged. A large crystal chandelier illuminated the scene, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. It was everything Elizabeth wanted, everything she worked so hard to achieve. A flawless display of family, tradition, and wealth. As the meal began, Catherine took a seat at the table, and the conversation flowed easily, as it always did at family gatherings. But the cracks were there. They were always there, lurking beneath the surface. As Elizabeth began carving the turkey, Catherine couldn't help but notice how perfectly everything was arranged. It was also flawless. "Thank you for the wonderful hospitality," Eleanor said, raising her wine glass with grace. Her eyes flickered toward Catherine, offering a silent reassurance, but Catherine could feel the tension building. "Of course, darling," Elizabeth replied, her tone smooth and controlled. "Tradition is everything. Family is everything." But Catherine could hear the unspoken message in her mother's voice, the subtle judgment that tainted every word. James squeezed her hand under the table, his touch grounding her in the midst of the storm brewing around them. "We're in this together," he whispered quietly, a small comfort in a sea of discomfort. But Catherine knew that the true test of this evening hadn't yet come. The questions were still hanging in the air, unspoken but ever-present. How would her family respond to her grief? Would they see her as the woman she was before the miscarriage, the woman she had fought so hard to become? Or would they continue to treat her as a disappointment, a failure? As the conversation shifted, Catherine tried to relax, to focus on the food before her. But the words kept coming, subtle, sharp remarks about her career, her choices. She was used to them, used to the quiet criticism that had followed her for years. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like every word was an accusation. "Have you and James been trying for another child?" Elizabeth asked, her voice laced with a strange curiosity. "I'm sure you're aware that you're not getting any younger. Time's ticking away." Catherine's stomach dropped. She swallowed hard, her grip on her fork tightening. "Mom, that's a private matter," she replied, her voice faltering just a little. But Elizabeth wasn't done. She continued, her tone unyielding. "You're a doctor, Catherine. You should know better. Stress, late nights, the pressure. It's all too much. Your age, too." "No," Catherine interrupted, her voice rising now. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, her anger flaring in response to her mother's cold words. "I don't need your advice, Mom." A heavy silence settled over the table, thick and suffocating. Her mother's face flickered with surprise, but Catherine didn't look away. She couldn't. For once, she refused to let her mother's judgment tear her apart. Eleanor, ever the voice of reason, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hand moving protectively toward Catherine. "Elizabeth, that's enough," she said softly, her voice firm but gentle. "There's no need to talk about this." But Elizabeth, unwilling to stop, pressed on. "Well, maybe it was a blessing. You were always so focused on your career. Maybe we've been spared having another defective addition to the family." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, as if time itself had stopped just to let the cruelty of her mother's words settle into her soul. The room fell silent. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft chatter. It all faded into nothingness. Catherine's vision blurred as she gripped the edge of the table with white-knuckled hands, fighting the tears threatening to fall. But what came next, what happened in that split second, would change everything. The power of standing up. The air around the dinner table was thick with tension, the words still hanging heavily in the air. Catherine's heart raced as she sat there, the warmth of the Thanksgiving dinner now replaced by a bitter chill that crept into her bones. Her mother's words echoed relentlessly in her mind, defective addition to the family. And each syllable cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. Her breath hitched in her throat. She could feel the tears rising, threatening to spill over, but she fought them back. She would not let her mother see her break, not this time. For years, Catherine had been the silent one, swallowing her hurt and trying to live up to the impossible standards that Elizabeth had set for her. But this time, it was different. As her mother continued, oblivious to the damage she was causing, Catherine stood up. The room fell silent as her chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. Her hands shook at her sides, but her resolve was unwavering. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. She couldn't keep accepting the hurtful words, the judgment that had been laid upon her for far too long. James stood up beside her, his eyes burning with a quiet fury. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder, the strength of his presence grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this. And then Catherine spoke. "You have no idea what it's like," Catherine began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For 2 years, James and I tried for a child. We waited, we hoped, we prayed. And when we lost that baby, it wasn't just the loss of a child. It was the loss of everything I had ever dreamed of. But somehow, through it all, I thought I could count on my family to help me heal, to understand. But instead, what I got were cruel words, criticism. And now, I realize it wasn't me who failed. It was you." The room was still. Her mother's face, once so composed and perfect, faltered slightly. But Catherine wasn't done. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it all flowed out of her, raw and unapologetic. "You failed to show me love. You failed to show me support," she continued. "And worst of all, you invalidated the pain I've been carrying. You treated my grief like it was a simple inconvenience, something to be brushed aside. You don't get to do that anymore. Not to me. Not to anyone." Her voice broke slightly at the end, but the strength in her words remained. She had never been this open, this vulnerable before, never this strong. For years, she had tried to keep the peace, to hide her true feelings behind a mask of politeness and perfection. But no more. James's hand tightened on her shoulder, and his eyes locked with hers. "We're leaving," he said quietly, but with authority. "And we're not coming back. Not until you can understand the damage you've caused." Eleanor stood up as well, her gaze stern and unyielding. "This isn't about family anymore, Elizabeth. It's about humanity. About showing kindness when it's needed most. About respecting the pain others are going through, no matter what it looks like on the outside." Catherine turned to leave, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and liberation. As she moved toward the door, she heard her mother's voice, weak and uncertain. "Kathy, I didn't mean." But Catherine didn't turn around. She couldn't. She had already made her choice. Her self-respect, her worth, her pain. They were no longer negotiable. They weren't for anyone to diminish. As she stepped outside into the cold night air, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had stood up for herself. For the first time in her life, she had chosen herself over the toxic love her family had tried to impose on her. She was more than the loss of a child, more than the criticisms of her career, more than the expectations placed upon her. James wrapped his arm around her as they walked into the night, the quiet hum of the city surrounding them. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "I've never been prouder of myself," Catherine replied, a small but genuine smile breaking through. "Sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's the only thing that will set you free." That night, Catherine didn't just leave her family's home. She left behind the weight of their expectations, their judgments, their silence. And for the first time in months, she felt something new. Peace. So, VARACLER, that the life is never about meeting the expectations of others or conforming to the image they've painted for you. It's about finding your own voice, your own strength, and standing firm in your own truth, no matter how hard or painful it may be. Often, the greatest battles we face aren't the ones fought with others, but the ones fought within ourselves. But when we stand tall in the face of adversity, when we refuse to let others define our worth, we give ourselves the greatest gift, the freedom to live authentically, without apology. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Your journey, your pain, your triumphs, they are all yours to define. And in the end, it is your own voice, your own love, and your own resilience that will carry you through the darkest of times. Stand up for yourself, because you are worth it.